Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed, part 2 of the July Q&A. Obviously still in the shed. Tim's at home doing his thing, but for those of you who missed part 1, we're in lockdown at the moment, and because we're in lockdown, I have my kids home, I'm getting stuff done at the house, lots of noise up there, so I've come down to the shed, and I think it's working out okay. Hopefully it is. Hopefully the audio's been okay. Hopefully my 4G reception's been okay, and Monitor Steve's not glitching all over the place too much. And yeah, we got a whole second round of questions to address, so we should probably get into that. What do you reckon, Tim?
Yeah, let's go.
Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Crynaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. Okay, Intel 12th Gen looking juicy. Thoughts? I don't have too many thoughts. As we've said countless times now on the channel, I don't even follow probably upcoming products as much as you guys would. I certainly understand the interest from you guys, but we're more focused on testing the products we have, looking back at older products. I really like looking at, like I've done recently with the 8700K, looking at how that's performing today compared to its competitor and how that compares to an original test or an older test from years gone. So that kind of stuff's far more interesting to me. So I'm more focused on that than looking at rumors or leak stuff, or even, I guess when it's announced, even that's more interesting to me. But at the same time, I don't think about the announcement too much. I just wait until we get it and start doing the testing. But have you got nothing to say, Tim?
Yeah, I'm in a pretty similar boat. I mean, I tend to just, people talk about it in our Discord community, for example, and you come across it on places like Twitter where people talk about these rumors. And, just over time, being in the industry and covering news and that sort of thing, you tend to see that the rumors, while they're not always inaccurate, they certainly tend to be on the optimistic side, especially quite a way out from when the products actually become available. And I think we saw something similar with the Intel Rocket Lake stuff, the 11th gen processors, where there was a lot of talk about how good that architecture would be. It wasn't going to be a world-beating architecture, but it was certainly promising decent performance uplifts. At least that's what the rumors were suggesting. And then you get closer and closer to launch, and some of the claims start getting walked back, and eventually it comes to the reviews and you see that performance, isn't as impressive as some of those early things were suggesting. Very similar situation with Zen 2 as well. I remember there was a lot of talk about, how is Zen 2 going to improve gaming performance over Zen 1 and Zen Plus. There was a lot of rumors and talk and, these leaked benchmarks coming out, or supposedly leaked benchmarks. And then it turns out that the actual performance that we're getting is not actually in line with what those rumors were suggesting. And it might not be far off, but if someone's claiming a 20% performance improvement and it turns out to be 10%, that's enough to significantly change the discussion. So when I see these rumors of Intel 12th generation offering, 20% better performance or 10% better performance or whatever it is in single or multi-threaded, it's like, it's nice to say that now, but how accurate is that information? Like, going on past data, we could say that those rumors are unlikely to be accurate because they tend to exaggerate performance claims. So that's why I tend not to get too carried away in making it like an Intel versus AMD battle right now, because the part isn't available. Like, we don't, is it worth getting all caught up in how good it's looking if we don't really know? It could be another Zen 2 situation where the performance is good in one area, but not as impressive in the areas that people care about. And you kind of, you try and extrapolate like Cinebench numbers to gaming and it doesn't really work. So yeah, those are just all the considerations that I like to make with thinking about rumors. It's nice to sort of look at some of the architectures that are coming up. Like, we know it's going to use big and little cores. That stuff interests me, but the actual performance claims, I just don't find that information super valuable, I guess.
Okay, similar question to what we've already answered. Do you think PC gaming will become more expensive and less accessible to some people as time goes on? The current prices leave me at a loss. Anything else to sort of add to that one, Tim, that we haven't already said?
No, not really. I think we covered a lot of that now when we were talking about, $400 entry-level GPUs versus $200, where there's always a market for a certain segment of gamers. Like, you know, while GPUs can be made super cheap, then they're going to be able to service that market. Hopefully, you know, at least, you know, whether that's older GPUs or the used market will pick up the slack or whatever the situation is. So I think, yeah, is gaming going to become more expensive and less accessible? In the short term, that has certainly happened. But over time, in sort of a normal market, once the rich people are all satisfied, not ruining the experience for everyone else, then, you know, you're going to get a situation where you can buy stuff like a PS5 or an Xbox Series S for like, what is it, $500 for a PS5 and like $250 or $300 for an Xbox. So if those prices are available for consoles, then the PC market can't just be $1,000 or $2,000 market, because it's not going to attract a certain audience that can only afford more console-like pricing. So, yeah, over time it'll be a situation like it's always been, where, yeah, there'll be people that can afford the expensive stuff, and there's going to be accessible hardware. And the used market, I think, plays a big role in that. As even today, when people are buying $1,000 GPUs, over time, in a couple of years, you could still buy like a 1080 Ti or a product like that, which is still pretty capable in today's games, for a lot lower price, and that makes it more accessible. Yeah, you're not getting the latest and greatest hardware, but that's great for people that are in that position. So, yeah, I think, as we've talked about, it'll solve itself over time, and yeah, it won't be as grim as it's looking at the moment.
No, and I know you were joking, but it isn't rich or wealthy PC gamers that are inflating prices.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They're obviously, at the moment, they're attributing to the problem, but that isn't... The problem hasn't been caused at all by PC gamers.
Yeah.
So it's other external forces at play that have created the situation that we're in now, and it's just gamers are still trying to get the cards. But if it was just PC gaming in a bubble, by now you'd be able to buy a 3080 at MSRP just as normal. So, or pick any model, and we'd probably have I'm almost certain we'd have the more entry level models by now. Like RDNA 2 and AMP would be fully rolled out, and you'd be able to buy whichever model you wanted at the MSRP if it was just gamers.
Yep.
In normal times, like no global pandemic and shipping crisis and substrate availability and all that kind of stuff that's thrown into the mix to make the perfect storm for not being able to buy a graphics card.
Yep.
Any ideas how Amazon MMO beta game is killing GPUs? Obviously, we're both aware of this story. I haven't really looked into it. Haven't had time for one, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this story. What do you think, Tim?
I found it interesting, a lot of the discussion around that it's Amazon's fault for this. Like, Amazon has managed to code this GPU killing software, and that, you know, they're to blame for making a virus. I mean, again, I don't have the full story, so I don't really know exactly what's going on. So let's just preface that for start before getting into this. But if a GPU is blowing up, like the VRM is blowing up, or the GPU has been running too high power and is dead, then that's the fault of the GPU, generally speaking, because the GPU has built-in protections. Like, a GPU is not generally allowed to run at like 1,000 watts, which may happen if there's no protection, you know, circuitry and things put into the firmware and all that sort of thing. So GPUs are built so that you can't just run a program and blow it up. And same with CPUs. You can't just run whatever you want and just blow the CPU up, because that would be disastrous, not just for users, but just imagine the viruses that people would make for computers. You could just be like, I don't want, you know, rival company developing software, so I'll just send them this virus that just blows up their CPU or GPU because they've got no protection software involved. So this is most likely to be a situation where, whether it's the 3090 entirely, or whether it's a certain brand's 3090 GPUs, or whatever the situation is, it's likely that the cause is some fault of the protection mechanism or some issue there that is allowing the GPU to be run out of spec in this certain workload, and the protection mechanisms aren't catching it, or potentially, you know, the VRM is supposed to run at a certain level and hasn't quite been built to that level. Something around that is likely to be causing this sort of issue. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that this particular game is doing something. Maybe it's running at a ridiculously high uncapped frame rate in a menu or something, and that's, you know, a really edge case scenario where the GPU can't really cope with that super well. again, I think that's likely going to be the cause. I expect they'll update the game so that it doesn't happen, just to be on the safe side. But yeah, be interesting to see what the conclusion is once people look into it, because I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of hardware fault, especially when we saw, remember back at the launch of like the 3080s and 3090s, there were issues with the
POS caps.
Yeah, and
is that what you're gonna say?
Yeah, and they had to like slightly downclock the GPUs or something like that to get them running stably. I wonder if there's any correlation there between those two issues. It'd be interesting to look into that.
They basically had to stabilize the frequency steps, how much it's boosting all over the place. They had to smooth that out to achieve stability. Who knows? Like, again, we didn't report on that until we spent, I can't remember how long it was now, but I think it was weeks speaking to AIBs, investigating ourselves, looking at user feedback and trying to work out what was going on. And in the end, we ended up getting it right. We're not going to make a video about this because we have no idea. All we're going to do is add to the confusion and possibly get it completely wrong. So unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can really test it out either. How much do you learn from blowing up a 3090 when other people, like, you look at it once and you're okay, we've blown that up, but does that tell us anything? It's a sample of one. Like, that's not a... You need to be blowing up like a lot of 3090s and trying to blow up other cards and all that sort of thing, which again becomes a very costly exercise and all that. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what the conclusion is to that, whether there were certain batches or something like that where, the components that they'd use, it might not even be the fault of whatever brand it is. Maybe they got a bad batch of components that they were relying on or something like that. And this very niche edge case thing pushed the power up. It might have been like a tiny spike or something, just pushed it well above its limits, and that was that. So yeah, I'm not sure where that will go. Maybe by the time this Q&A is actually released, we'll have a bit more information on that. But yeah, it's certainly interesting to see stuff like that happen when it really shouldn't. All right, since AMD is capable of making both high-end CPUs and GPUs, why won't they make a gaming APU? Something with performance of PS5, but optimized for PC. The reason, well, there's probably a few different reasons. One reason would be that it's just not cost effective. I think what's beautiful about the whole PC platform is that you can select your motherboard individually. You can select your memory that goes on the motherboard and then the CPU that goes on it. Like, obviously there are like BGA systems where the CPU is soldered to the motherboard and maybe you can get memory fixed on it and all that sort of stuff as well, which is heading towards being a PS5, but we don't want that as PC owners. You want all your components individual if you can, unless you're making like a really niche, for some reason you need a really compact gaming PC, which I realize there are people that want that and there are solutions that cater to that market, but that's really what this would be for. Most of you don't really want integrated graphics unless there's some reason for why that's useful at a point in time. But most people who are buying like a 5600G or a 5700G will ultimately end up with a discrete graphics card. So the GPU within the CPU, the APU, is a make-do type solution. There will be some people that make like desk mini type PCs that put it at their TV or whatever and don't want a graphics card for whatever reason. I always find those systems to be fairly impractical myself, because you can make a mini ITX system that's not much bigger, significantly more flexible and more powerful. So yeah, but basically the reason why they don't make super powerful APUs is because it's a super niche market. They're really addressing a very niche market, and it's very expensive to make a fast APU because realistically you need like local memory. You need some sort of VRAM, so you don't have to go through the PCI Express bus. Yeah. And once you do that, it's heavily dependent on the system memory, and there's only so fast that can be, and it's certainly nothing like local memory.
Yeah, I mean, you see with the PS5 that there's no DDR4 in there. It's all GDDR memory. So, yeah, I think you make a really good point about how basically all the components on the motherboard would need to be soldered on there and not user changeable. So the GPU, the memory, the motherboard, the CPU all have to be sold as a package. And it's like, yeah, okay, you can maybe sell that for as much as like a PS5, whatever the materials cost is, which I'm sure is higher than the price of the console. Then you're saying, well, what's the value proposition of buying that versus buying individual components? We know a lot of people, for example, upgrade their GPU twice as often as their CPU. You buy a modern 8-core CPU, you would expect that to last for maybe 5 or 6 years, Whereas if you buy a GPU, you might want to upgrade that after 2 years. If you buy an APU, well, you spent all this money to buy the GPU, but you can't then go and take it out and sell it. That's still in your system, and then you're buying like a secondary GPU. So how does that value proposition weigh up? It would really have to be for a system that you don't plan on upgrading at all, which, as you say, for a lot of people, that's not why you would want to build a PC. It's not.
Yeah, I don't know who wants a Windows console. And again, it's not cost effective because also we know the consoles aren't sold at a profit.
Yeah, that's
They make the profit through the game ecosystem. And so they're not going to be selling the PC hardware at a loss. So it ends up being more expensive again. It's like, who wants to pay that much money for a really slow APU when it's significantly cheaper to buy your CPU and graphics card separately and significantly more powerful, which is what we found with the 5700G. And that's a much, how much is this proposed much faster APU going to cost if we're looking at $360 US for the 5700G? Do you want to pay $500 for an APU?
Yeah, that's right. There's all sorts of manufacturing implications as well. Like the fact that the CPU and GPU are separate means that they're separate dies. So it means that the dies themselves are smaller, which makes them less prone to manufacturing defects. There's going to be lower waste, which makes them cheaper. The more stuff you try and add into like a monolithic die, like the PS5 die, you start making it larger and larger and larger. You start getting these really big dies, which are not going to be as cost effective for you to buy, but instead of having them all separate, which is exactly why AMD's gone down the chiplet path with the CPUs. And we're seeing a lot of rumors about GPUs going down that path as well, is that you can't just keep making monolithic dies larger and larger. So we start getting mid to high end performance GPUs and a CPU in the same package. We're already at very large sizes for GPUs as is. It could even be more expensive. I mean, it's already going to be more expensive from a whole range of reasons that you've already listed, but even just from making the die, it's going to be more expensive than having the components separate. So
look, down in the future, we could get chiplet-based APUs, which would be faster than what we have today. But to get a chiplet-based APU that is delivering the level of performance you would get from a mid-range setup where the CPU and GPU are separate, it's going to end up costing pretty much the same amount of money whether you bought those components separately. So APUs are always going to be very much an entry-level solution, at least for a while. I can't see them really breaking into being mid-range gaming solutions anytime soon. I'm not really sure when that would make sense because it's at a disconnect with what the PC is all about, the PC platform.
Yeah, and we hear this a lot, don't we? With each APU, it's always like, wouldn't it be great if they could make that GPU so much faster? Like, it'd be so great if the GPU wasn't an entry-level product. And then you see the next generation comes out and they improve the GPU performance of the APU, but it's still, because all the other GPUs have improved in performance, it ends up in the exact same market position. And then the rumors come out and they're like, the next GPU is going to offer like mid-range performance. Then it comes out and it turns out it's still entry-level because the GPU market's moved ahead again. So
look, it's no different to like if you didn't understand all of this and you're looking at it from a non-tech savvy perspective. You're like, I can't wait for the next generation laptops because my laptop will then be faster than my desktop, so I'll get the laptop for gaming. But it's like, well, you could buy a desktop for the same generation and it will be faster again.
All right, Steve, have you already planned how to test the different cores in the upcoming Intel CPUs? What benchmarks do you consider best for those?
I don't. Well, as for science type thing, that may be interesting to look into if you can isolate, what cores you're using and compare, the slower cores to the faster cores. That, I'm sure something like that will definitely happen. But generally speaking, it's somewhat irrelevant, I suppose you could say, because really all we care about is just how it performs. That's really all you should care about as well. So how does it perform in the games you want to play? How does it perform in the applications you want to use? And so really we're just looking at the overall performance of the CPU. And I guess it'll be interesting to see how it schedules and prioritizes various cores for various tasks and how that all works. But no plans to change anything for the actual reviews. So we'll still be using all the same benchmarks, same applications, same games, all that sort of stuff. Is that what you'd expect, Tim?
Yep, absolutely.
How to tell what leaks are accurate and what aren't. You just use Tim's crystal ball, the news corner ball.
Yeah, geez, it'd be handy to have a couple more of those to hand out to people. Yeah, I mean,
We don't really tell though, do we? Because we don't cover leaks or rumors, and we don't really discuss them if we can help. So I suppose we don't. There's not too many tools that we use to, decrypt whether it's accurate or not. But
yeah,
go on, Tim.
I think the easiest way is to have actually good inside information, so then you can figure out whether it's right or not.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I mean, I think most leaks and rumors that you see are not true. So I think that's just, first of all, use some pretty liberal judgment when trying to figure out what leaks are accurate, and just assume that most of them aren't. But there's some really basic stuff that tends to come out with these things. Like, for example, pricing rumors well before launch are almost certainly not true, because a lot of companies decide pricing very close to launch. There might be a price range that a company is targeting with a certain product, but if we're talking specific dollar values, like months before launch, you can basically just forget that, because it's not going to be accurate. And there's other things as well that you can see from just following trends of what companies, how companies have launched things, and what companies tend to do, and what sounds reasonable for just. It's almost like just the common sense test. Like, does this thing sound something that's going to happen, or does it sound like something that's well beyond what you're expecting for that product? In which case, it's not as likely to be accurate. I think that's a fairly sort of a proven method. If something sounds too good to be true, then it probably is most of the time in this sort of market, where incremental gains are by far the most common sort of gain that we get generation on generation. So yeah, I think that tends to be how to approach leaks. Certainly there are some people out there that have decent information and things like layouts and just the general things that could happen for future products. That tends to be stuff that leakers can get accurate. But when it comes down to clock speeds, pricing, specific performance mentioned well ahead of time, that stuff's not likely to be very true most of the time. So yeah, and that's why I think occasionally leaks can be detrimental to the market when people start talking. And we talked about a little bit about this in the Intel 12th generation discussion from earlier, where a lot of the time performance estimations in these leaks tend to exaggerate what the products end up doing, and then that can lead to people being disappointed when the product comes out because it didn't match the leak. I think people just take a very cautious approach with most leaks, and go from there. But I know a lot of people have fun with that sort of thing and have fun speculating, so I don't want to rain on those people's parades, because it is a bit of fun. But just keep things manageable.
FSR and DLSS have the ability to extend the life of cards that are now able to push to playable frame rates. Do you think that upscaling technology is discouraging consumers from upgrading by extending the life of old ones? If so, what is the benefit to NVIDIA and AMD? I don't really think that's what's going on personally, but I'm interested to hear from you, Tim, since you've covered these technologies extensively.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily happening either. I think it's a way for games to improve the quality that they can offer to you, because these aren't driver level features. I think this would be more the case if it was like a universal driver level feature where you could turn it on and suddenly all games are like 30% faster, because then that would be discouraging you from buying a GPU that's 30% faster, although that card would also still be 30% faster. It may make the games that you play more playable for a longer period of time. What I think it's actually doing is, because these technologies often come out in new games, so you see the latest title come out and it launches with DLSS or FSR, or fingers crossed in the future both technologies, then that allows the developer to increase the quality of things like ray tracing, for example. Make that, instead of a setting you turn on and has no visual difference, it actually has some visual difference. They're able to use things like reflections, which tend to be the more visually impressive ray tracing element, as opposed to a game like, I don't know, Dirt 5, where you turn on ray trace shadows and you're like, is that setting on or not? And there's all sorts of other features that they could enable, right? Like, it's not just ray tracing; it could be more geometry, more textures, more anything that improves the visual quality of the game. So I think that's the benefit that we're getting from these technologies. Games can push the boundaries further and make better looking games at the same sort of performance. It's not as much the old game comes out with now supporting DLSS or FSR. I don't think we've seen too many occasions where that has really, really happened to a significant degree. It's maybe been like a Red Dead Redemption 2, which has just launched with DLSS, where that's happened. But for the most part, I think it's more about, giving you more performance for features that make sense. And then you still have the incentive to upgrade because, the features are going to be, you might be running 60 FPS ray tracing with DLSS. Next card comes out and it does it at 100 FPS. There's still your incentive there to upgrade. So I think that tends to be what we'll see with these sorts of things, which is, a good thing for games overall, I think.
Yeah, and for extending the life of older cards, to sort of elaborate on that a bit more, obviously DLSS doesn't have that ability anyway because you have to have an RTX graphics card. So what's the slowest RTX graphics card? The 2060?
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it may help extend the life of that card to a degree. FSR, the problem with, I think, with both technologies, in particular FSR, if you've got a 2060 and you're sort of dialing down from 1440p to extend the life at 1080p, DLSS isn't as good at 1080p opposed to 1440p, and that's certainly true with FSR. So FSR, extend the life of a GTX 1060 or an RX 580 as two comparable examples there. I've been pretty unimpressed with the 1080p quality for those GPUs to extend life. I think it wouldn't really extend the life for me. I think I'd be like, okay, this thing's just not fast enough anymore. I'm going to upgrade. If that was the situation that you're in. So, yeah.
I think generally when it comes to like extending the life, like generally whatever games are available now, you're going to be happy with because you've had that GPU, that's the level of performance you're getting. So I think the question comes down to, are future games going to be like increasing their graphics level, but then using DLSS to give you the same performance you've already got, in which case without DLSS, then that is kind of extending the life? Or are they going to go even further than what was already just normally planned, which I think we've sort of seen with like a Cyberpunk game where without running like a DLSS type technology, the ultra settings are pretty punishing on, even without ray tracing on cards like that. So I agree. I don't think that the extending the life thing is going to necessarily play out. I guess it depends. Like, is FSR going to be in a lot of lower, like in a lot of games that are already out on the market? Then it might do what you're saying. But yeah, it's just, I think generally speaking, what it's going to do is you're still going to want to upgrade, but it's just going to mean that developers have so much more that they're able to do in games without worrying too much about gamers running it at 30 FPS, because you can turn on these features and get playable performance. Which video games would you say you're best at? No, Steve, benchmarking for 24 hours straight doesn't count as a video game. Luckily,
really?
I know you, Steve. You're not too bad at actual games.
I can play video games okay. I love the way people think because we benchmark and test things, we're just like absolutely hopeless. And we're like, how do we aim with the mouse? What's happening? But yeah, I got into this because of video gaming. That's actually what got me into it. So I think we've talked about it many times in the past. So I won't give you my full history, what led me into this industry, but it was gaming a long time ago. As of recent, so when I was working, it was about a year or two, I really worked hard on the channel to bring Tim on board. Tim was wrapping up his degree, his university degree, and he sort of indicated that he would like to come onto Hardware Unboxed full time and try that out and see if we can make it work. So I really wanted to bring Tim on board. I saw a great opportunity there. So I think for 2 years, I was pumping out. I was working 24/7, 16, 18-hour days. It was insane grind. I knew it wasn't sustainable, but you have to do what you have to do. And it worked out in the end. But in that time, in that about 2-year period, I played computer games once, which was kind of crazy, but I guess I was really enjoying the channel. I was so focused on it in a way that was kind of like my computer game time. It sounds silly, but
so you're benchmarking, as this comment says. That's kind of true. Yeah,
I was benchmarking like crazy. So I was seeing the games. I was getting to, when a new game came out, like the Cyberpunk of the time, whatever it was, I got to play that for an hour or so. So if you include that, then I wasn't really playing it to enjoy it. I was playing it to like monitor the statistics and work out where it was demanding. But basically during that period, there was a close friend that I used to play a lot of StarCraft 2 with, and he'd been busy with work as well. And I think it was about, let's say, a year into it. He said, I've got a day off work. Let's catch up, play some StarCraft 2. So he came over, we did that. It was an awesome day. But that was the only time I played games for 2 years, which is kind of crazy. And then I think last year was a crazy year on the channel. Again, not a whole lot of gaming was done last year, but my daughter now is getting older. She's 8 years old and she's getting into computer games. So I'm trying to play more with her. Last year, yeah, as I said, crazy year. Didn't get much time for anything apart from like covering all the latest products and stuff. And then at the start of this year, Tim and I decided to dial it back a bit, which you guys have probably noticed. We're sort of doing 2 videos each per week, 2 to 3. Generally around 2, and then I spend the rest of the time, doing stuff with the family, playing games with the kids. Sometimes that's computer games, sometimes it's outdoor games, and inevitably my daughter made me play a lot of Fortnite, which we've talked about before. And I did not like Fortnite initially. For quite a while I did not like Fortnite, but she wanted me to play it, so I played it, and I decided if I'm gonna have to play this thing, I'm gonna get good at it. And so I've got half decent at it. So I'd say at the moment, if I had to 1v1 someone in a game, I'd probably pick Fortnite. Previously, it would have definitely been StarCraft 2, but I've been out of the StarCraft 2 game now realistically for like 5-6 years. So I'd probably be pretty hopeless. I'd be down in Bronze League trying to work out what's what.
You probably still beat me. I've never played it. So,
well, yeah, I'm probably not that bad.
Yeah.
Go on, Tim.
I'd say that when you say you're half decent at Fortnite, you're actually pretty good from some of the highlights that I've seen that you share in the Discord community. Certainly much better than I am at those sort of games. Yeah, as I've talked about in the past, I haven't played a ton of multiplayer games. It's not really my sort of thing. Yep. I do enjoy playing some multiplayer games when they come out and having fun with friends and that sort of thing. But single player games are my sort of thing. So can you be good at single player games? I don't know whether that's really possible because you just kind of play the game. It's not as much about being the best at it. But I'd say if I was going to 1v1 someone in a game, I would choose a turn-based strategy. So something like Civilization, like Civ 6 or Civ 4, one of those sort of games. I don't think I would be as good at real-time strategies. And I'm not bad at shooters and that sort of thing, but I don't think I would be like a 1v1 winner sort of level at that. I think if I was going to play to my strengths, I would choose a turn-based strategies like that sort of game, which I tend to do okay at. So yeah, but I think both of us, we're trying to find a bit more time this year, as you said, to enjoy games and enjoy the things that got us into doing this, so that we're not just burning ourselves out and getting on the grind and then never finding time for that sort of thing. So yeah, I've been playing more games this year as well, and it's been good. Yeah, I've been enjoying it. Yep. So I think it's a much more healthy balance that we've got ourselves into, and we can get good at games again. get good. Yeah, I think it's all a blur to me, but I think it was it last sort of October where it was just insane. Yeah, there's just no time for anything.
I've got probably as close to burnt out as you can get without actually getting burnt out. Like that was an insane period. I just sort of scrambled from one release to the next, and yeah, I think that was sort of what caused us to make a few changes. And that is going to do it for part 2 of this month's Q&A. But of course, there is always part 3. Just knocked my microphone and made my whole desk wobble. I'm using a camping desk at the moment. So yeah, it's a little bit wobbly. I've got to be careful not to touch anything. But yeah, that's going to do it for part 2. Obviously, a lot of awesome questions as we always get. And there'll be more to come in part 3. So if you haven't watched part 1, you can go do that while you wait for part 3. And then make sure you stick around for part 3. Cool. Well, that's going to do it. As I said, we got Float Plane, Patreon, the usual stuff where you can get in there and you can just ask us questions whenever you want and basically make fun of me on Discord. That's what most of you guys seem to do that are on there. And yeah, or watch Tim build Lego. I can't believe you got away with, for work, you did a Lego live stream while I think I was doing a 35 game benchmark, and Tim's just here building Lego, and he's like, yeah, I'm taking the day off, pretty quiet at the moment.
Yeah, that wasn't too bad. I think, yeah, I'd done like 20 monitors or something, and I had my monitor backlog. It had all been sorted, so I thought, you know what, for the Patreon members, we'll get in, we'll do some Lego live streams. It had been hotly requested, but you can watch the replay of that if you sign up to the Patreon or Float Plane where that's available. So yeah, bit of fun there. Maybe we'll do another one in the future, and maybe I'll rope you in one day. You can come over, we can do something.
I'll have my tongue out trying to stick bricks together. Can I bring my power tools? Then I might be in for it.
Oh jeez. All right.
How does your Lego go against a reciprocating saw, Tim?
Yeah, I think I'm uninviting you now. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. We'll see you in part 3. I'm your host, Tim, which I'm doing first now. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve, and we'll see you again
next time
soon.